Thanks for coming today, Colin.
Pleasure. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And kind of just wanted to start by asking you about your time at Belfast School of Art.
I was here from 87 to 91. And I suppose firstly from a personal point of view, to come out of a very academic grammar school background where art, whilst the art department was brilliant, it was kind of sidelined as far as what was important within the school, to suddenly come into an environment where the only thing you could do was explore and experiment and play in the broad realms of what art is, was an eye-opening treat and privilege. And I suppose I grabbed it with both hands, and I realised that if I was going to make something of the 4 years, I quickly realised that the facilities were there, the people were there, but gone were the days of people driving you in a particular direction. I was responsible for the direction that I drove myself in. And really I see my foundation year here as being the start of my career. And, it also was, I think for me, and I think for a lot of us at the time, and many people will say this, having come through the art school, particularly where it's located in York Street, and bearing in mind that, back then it was a part of the city that nobody wanted to hang around. It was an escape from the division, the fracture, the troubles going on outside. It was a haven from that. I wasn't aware of any issues regarding whether you were a Protestant or Catholic in art college. And that was an escape. That was an education in its own right. So what I would say was my 4 years here set me up for the rest of my career. It was the foundation on which my career was built.
So what did you study at Belfast School of Art?
Well, yeah, I did the foundation year where I really experimented, particularly with three-dimensional work and with photography, actually. But I did a design degree and focused on illustration and graphic design in my final year. I realised, I think, in my final year that painting had interested me more than I thought it had.
Yeah.
And I focused on painting final year through the facility within the design course that allowed me to focus on the illustration side of things.
So that was kind of your initial falling in love with painting, would we call it that?
Yeah, probably my initial falling in love with painting at art college. I mean, I fell in love with painting when I was 1.
Okay.
Whenever a crayon or a paintbrush was put into my hand. That was, and I just never stopped. But I always made things as a kid. I as well as painting, it was just general creating things that didn't exist before. But yeah, I think you become, I think certainly after 4 years at art college, you become attuned to what you sort of feel the long term might be in your career and in your practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about artistic influences? So people that have, or even an exhibition, because I think for our students, anyone's listening, it's, actually seeing artwork
Yeah.
is completely different than seeing it maybe online or digitally. So is there anything, even of recent years or in the past, whatever it is, that's been really like influential on you, like seeing something in person?
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, it's a tragedy that people basically only see art a lot of the time on their smartphones, something the size of a postcard, smaller than a postcard. And that's a lot of the time how art is judged and art is seen, and I have a real problem with that. Now, I've had to jump into that, and I do realise that on my own website and on Instagram and things like that, you got to join that. But no, there is no substitute for engaging directly with a work of art. There, a photograph of a painting, a photograph of a sculpture, in no way captures the spirit of it. And yeah, so engaging directly with art is critical. I love it when I travel, just going and seeing new things. And I love also going and seeing small exhibitions that maybe aren't publicised, or even going and seeing the degree shows here. I find those incredibly inspiring. Not only do I recognise myself back in those days, and I knew how exciting and how stressful that period was, but here is work being made by people who are doing nothing but exploring, playing, finding for themselves. They're out of their depth, which is the best possible place to be creative. Nothing exciting happens when we're in our comfort zone. And so I love coming to the degree shows here. I find them, not that I'm necessarily picking bits out of people's work that I find inspiring. I mean, I find the whole spirit of the encounter with the entire show to be something that is uplifting and inspiring for me. I mean, you ask about inspiration. Inspiration comes from anywhere and everywhere. It can be an idea popping into your head whenever you're in the car, falling asleep.
Hopefully not in the car.
Oh, wow. Yeah, sorry.
Well, maybe you're a passenger. It's fine.
Let's assume that's the case. It, and I've learnt, I think, to tune into that.
Yeah.
To not be in a zone where I'm not listening or looking. And all of that feeds into the studio practice. It can be in a subliminal way as well, Yeah.
And do you think as you sort of proceed in your career as an artist, you get better at tuning into that creative place, I guess we could call it, or process of making or designing or creating?
I think possibly, yes. I think, though, I can only speak for myself. And I suppose as I have developed in my own career, I've actually realised more and more and more what I don't know. And, I often say, whenever I left art college in 1991, I felt I knew more about painting back then than I do now. I realise so much what I don't know. I realise so much that there are lifetimes, and there are many lifetimes worth of learning that absolutely can't be crammed into one career. So I think yes, you do learn where the triggers are for finding that, but you also realize that actually those aren't the only ways. And I mean, I talked about graduates and students whenever they're making their degree shows, you know, being out of their comfort zone. That's where I try and reside now.
Yeah.
That's where I need to be to create my work now. So I would hate to think that I would have reached the end of that. I would hate to think that I have got to a point where I have achieved what I set out to achieve. I absolutely haven't set out I absolutely haven't achieved what I set out to. But then again, I don't necessarily know what I set out to achieve.
Yeah, it's just a continual sort of growth of your work.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about your portraiture? You're could we say that you're quite famous for your portraits? Has it always been portraits, or, you know, is there a body of work outside of that, or, you know, or is that your main focus? That question.
I think people would know me mainly because of my portraits, but I only started making my portraits when I was 42. It was well into my career. And I've only really been making portraits for 14, 15 years now. So it's a very small part of my practice. Certainly right now, whilst I always love to have a portrait on the go, there's a kind of a touchstone about it now. There's a kind of a benchmark set with, you know, always having the discipline of making the portrait in the background that allows me to use the tension of that, the contrast to bounce off and to really experiment. I'm making three-dimensional work a lot now.
Okay.
I call them three-dimensional paintings, and they can be quite large things. And I'm doing a show at the RHA at the end of this year, actually, where I'm showing a lot of those large ones for the first time. And but yeah, I mean, I never set out to be a portrait painter at all. In fact, I didn't want to be a portrait painter. I kind of happened upon it when I painted Duke Special, a friend of mine, back in 2010. And I just got a lot of attention for that one painting. And then there was a momentum that got behind that, where people would introduce me to somebody interesting to paint, and then I would get a commission to paint someone, and suddenly I was in it without being entirely able to answer the question why or how. But because I found myself in it, I went with it. And I'm glad I did.
I had no idea that was your first portrait, Duke Special.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
First large one.
First
I mean,
large one.
I'd sort of played around with portraiture a little bit before that, but that was the first large.
So are your portraits, for anyone that hasn't seen them in real life, again, we would suggest that people do try and see them in life, in person, but what size are we talking about when you say large? Like what?
Well, I mean, I suppose I remember painting the portrait of Duke back in 2010, and I just lifted a canvas up from my store and went, right, that's the size I'm going to make that. It wasn't designed. I felt I needed to paint him larger than life, although again I hadn't been a particular fan of overblown head paintings. But there was something about this look, this encounter, that made me want to maybe feel the need to use the paint in a certain way, and it needed to be that size. And since then, everything has been largely that size, just off 4 foot square.
Okay.
The exact size is 127 centimeters by 116, I think. But it's that's the and I suppose it came to the point where I saw everybody as an equal.
Yeah.
Where I wasn't where I was focusing purely on the face. And because I think if I was solely a portrait painter, I would probably wouldn't have stuck to that format at all. I probably would have gone outside that and done different things. But because portraiture is a part of what I do, and now a smaller part of what I do, that format is important for me as the creator to get back into that zone again.
Okay.
And
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, some people could be critical of that, and I understand that, but for me it works in my whole practice.
Yeah. Amazing. You've done a lot of very famous portraits.
Yeah.
Is there any that stick out in your mind as interesting encounters, or is like, first of all, when someone comes to sit for you, I take it it's always sitting, it's always from life, is it?
Yeah, I mean, let me just briefly answer that final question.
Sorry, I've got a lot of questions in there, sorry.
Yeah. There's always a sitting
with
the person who I paint. There have been a couple of posthumous paintings that I've made that I have decided to do, but that is the exception.
Okay.
So I will always spend at least 2 hours with someone. I make lots of what I call shorthand drawings, very, very quick drawings. I photograph them, and then in the months after that, the painting is made in my studio from those things. When I painted people like Michael Longley, who could come to my studio day after day, I made the Michael Longley paintings from life.
Wow.
Because he could come back again and again and again. But when you're painting people like Bill Clinton or the Queen or Brad Pitt, you don't have the luxury of saying, would you mind coming back to my studio once a day for the next month? The answer would just be no.
Yeah.
So you'd never get the painting made.
Yeah, true.
So find a way of making the painting with what I can get. Most important, to go back to your original question there, I think for me, looking back on the last 15 years of making portraits, what it's all been about is an exhibition I made in 2014, was first shown in the Ulster Museum in 2015, an exhibition called Silent Testimony, and where I painted 18 people who suffered loss through the Troubles. People who aren't known outside their family and friends, people they work with, hadn't had a chance to tell their harrowing, traumatic, tragic stories before. And I used the medium of portraiture to highlight something that I was particularly passionate about, and that is the fallout of the Good Friday Agreement. I voted yes in the Good Friday Agreement. I wanted a future for my kids. I want a future for this place. But I realised the really nearly impossible compromises that victims and survivors were making. And when I started making my portraits, I realised I might have found a way to express that as an artist. And whenever I look back on what the portraits have all been about, I told you at the start I didn't know why, but I went with it. I think that's what it's been about.
Okay.
About making that body of work. That, for me, is what my portraits are all about, and those are the 18 most important portrait paintings to me.
Yeah. I can say that as well. I teach history and theory in fine art as well as in textiles, and recently there's been quite a lot of students who have come to us with ideas around or been very interested in your work. particularly those portraits. So just to let you know that it's, it means a lot to the students as well. So
Well, I mean, that's really heartening to hear. And I think, any art student is going to realise this, that actually whenever you're working away on your own and you're making your work, as I was with Silent Testimony on my own, albeit with the people who sat for me, you've no idea what the response is going to be. You do need people to engage with your work.
mm-hmm.
That's what it's about. Art's about the engagement with the work. That's where the mysterious magic happens, whenever a viewer fills in the gaps intangibly left by the artist. That, there's no point, in my view, in a piece of art that isn't being seen.
Mm-hmm.
A piece of music that's not being listened to. There's no point in it, to me. So yeah, I as I say, that is really interesting to hear. It has developed a life of its own, the exhibition. It's just come down from 10 months at the National Portrait Gallery, which was a real privilege to show it there. But also, as an artist, it's a privilege to show work there.
Yeah.
But it was more as a human being from this part of the world who grew up through the dark days in Belfast, to have those stories aired in a world-leading, world-class institution that millions of people are potentially going to see. That's the most important bit of all. And there is I held back as an artist in that exhibition, in that work. That whole experience of making that exhibition was as much about what I left out and removed as it was about what I created.
Mm-hmm.
In order to not be preachy, in order for it not to be propaganda art, this was something that I was deliberately holding back on spelling it all out. So in other words, people came in and formed an opinion themselves, rather than being told what to feel or think. Of course, that wouldn't have been art at all, in my view. Art is a question. Art is alive in the question. And art should never, in my view, give an answer to anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to ask a question after that. That's really. I just end with really future projects. I mean, even Silent Testimony. Is it going to be anywhere else, or is it going to be in a permanent collection, or do you know where that's going to be? Because it seems like a very important collection of work.
Yeah, and it's a collection that I suppose I still own. I will never sell that. We will probably put it into a trust of some sort, and I can't make. It's not commercial.
Yeah.
It couldn't possibly be commercial. The interesting thing is that as people see it around the world, and we've shown it a few times in New York, we showed it at the UN there in 2018. It's been, it's been many places, and the word just spreads, and then sometimes we get a call from somewhere.
Okay.
We'd love to show that. And that's how Silent Testimony has worked. There's no doubt that the Ulster Museum and We Have Trauma, who I partnered with on making the work, they have a very active and ongoing role with the exhibition, and the Ulster Museum are quite active in actually placing it
Okay.
in various locations. But I tend to, I think this is true of my entire career actually, I tend not to push heavily on any door. I don't kick a door down to get what I want or what I think the next stage of my career should be. If there's a door that's ajar, I'll explore. But I'll not, and largely that's served me well, because things have ended up happening at the right time rather than at the time that I thought back then it should be. And that has taught me patience, I suppose, in a big way. But it's a bit of an unknown. We to be specific about it, we do have a couple of options at the minute as to where it might go in the next couple of years.
Okay.
There certainly would be an appetite, I think, to have it more as a permanent display here, because any time it goes up in Belfast, it's been in the Ulster Museum 3 times. It's been in Stormont. You know, people just go and see it, and you know, it never seems to dry up in the sense of the, you know, allowing, creating that safe space where people can reach conclusions of their own.
Yeah. Just to end, can I ask you, for any student really at university, but particularly those in Belfast School of Art and those maybe interested in painting and portraiture as well, what's your advice? What can you give? That's a very open-ended question. But is there any piece of advice that you, for instance, wish you could go back and say to yourself upon leaving Belfast School of Art? What would that piece of advice be?
I think for me, it's something I'm still trying to learn, but something which I've much more of a handle on than I did back then, and that is that only you have your voice. Nobody else has your voice. Only you can be you. And I think that particularly with any career or practice in the arts, the whole issue of confidence, self-confidence, confidence in our work, confidence in what we've got to say, we question it all the time, and that actually is a good thing. But sometimes what that can do is to lead us down the road of trying to look at the heroes who we admire and to be like them. That's I'm constantly grappling with that. But we need to I think if I'd been told that back then, that actually your voice is enough. In fact, your voice for you is best. I think that would have been an eye-opener to me back then.
Oh, excuse me, just ruined your answer. I actually thought of another question that I really, really wanted to ask you. It's a bit cheeky.
Oh, wow. Right, okay.
So, has anyone ever hated their portrait that you've done?
Wow. Most people have been very polite.
Oh, good.
I think if I'm doing my job right, and I am attempting to see something that no photograph can see or no film can see, to see behind that self-imposed facade that we all put up.
That's why I'm asking the question.
Whether we like it or not,
yeah.
and I'm talking about myself here.
Yeah.
I have a self-imposed facade, And I think it's probably so that I protect myself from you seeing the bits of myself that I don't like. If I do my job right and see behind that facade, there will be something uncomfortable in every portrait that I make for the sitter to come face to face with. That's not actually something that concerns me remotely. I'm more interested in the integrity and the honesty of me representing the encounter, and not, to say, a photograph will give you an accurate view of what that person looks like. There's no point in me painting another painting where I just show what the photograph holds. That's why the sitting is critical.
Yeah.
That's why the drawings are critical. Although the photography is really important as well, the photography's there to back up the experience, the encounter. So to go right back to answer your question that you really, really wanted to know, I think probably absolutely yes. Sitters haven't fallen in love with their painting or the painting of them, but largely they've been very polite.
Good. For very good reasons. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
It's great to chat to you.
Thank you.